and mental health theories, we hope. So I think once again, thank you very much for Dr. Wendy, and we look forward to seeing you again in Indonesia for other collaborations, not only for lecture exchange, but maybe for research or student research, and maybe you can visit again to our faculty and we can send our student or lecturers or professor to your very wonderful institution. UCL, I think, is very famous in Europe. So that's all. Thank you very much and enjoy. And we hope that our student and lecturer have a lot of inspirations about well-being and mental health from your sessions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ananta, for the welcoming speech. Okay, to Dr. Eli Liandari Dinatirin, Magister of Science, Psychologist, please take over to the next session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your coming today, and it's very honored to have Dr. Wendy here with us. And I think, in short, we'll hear from you soon. Okay, but maybe I will introduce Dr. Wendy for a little bit. That Dr. Wendy is a lecturer in University College London. I still have to remember because there's a new one, and also she is a deputy
art director,
art and humanity, and also there are several journals that she wrote already, and several books also. So for now, in short, we would like to hear from you, and the time is yours, Dr. Wendy. Okay, we would like to say silahkan in Indonesia. Maybe you're familiar with that. Okay, please, Dr. Wendy, please have your time.
Thank you very much. Shall I start sharing my PowerPoint again?
Okay.
Okay, fingers crossed. I will try to make the slides bigger, but sometimes when I do that, it's a little bit hard to move through the slides because of my internet connection is not very good here. So I'll try. So slideshow from beginning. See if, yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed, it works. Thanks very much for having me. It's lovely to see you all, and it's great to be able to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing in the UK and other work I've done around mental health and well-being. Today, I want to talk a little bit about mental health and well-being of students. I also want to talk about what is going on with diverse groups of students and how can we help young people with their mental health. The world is just coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, or we are actually still maybe in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the UK, the COVID numbers are going up. Although most people have been vaccinated, there are problems still. This means that certain groups of people are isolated. And just to give you a quick overview of how mental health support in the UK happens, and we can also talk about how this applies to other global contexts. In the UK, a child is entitled to help from the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services until they are 18. When they are 18, they have to get support from adult mental health services, but that's not always easy because the thresholds are very high. In UK universities, we are mostly teaching online still. Only small groups are face-to-face, and some students are suffering with their mental health. These are also students at obviously younger ages, secondary school and primary school. So what I'd like to talk about first, in my career, and I'm currently an associate professor in interdisciplinary well-being, I have done quite a lot of research around mental health and safeguarding. The first question we need to ask people is, what is mental health? Because of course, mental health is positive. We all in the world have mental health. If your mental health is positive, you can cope with challenges, you can cope with problems. But if your mental health is impaired, if you have a mental health problem, things are not easy. So how can we support young people, especially young people from diverse communities? I would also like to talk a little bit about my research around mental health literacy, and I will explain to you what mental health literacy means. Also, students, again, from diverse backgrounds, especially listening to them. There is a tendency in research and in practice around mental health and well-being to come up with tools and questionnaires, but we actually need to listen to people who have mental health issues. Just to give you a little example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, I was asked to go into a school in Portsmouth, and it was a school for children and young people with social and emotional and behavioral difficulties. These young people had experienced quite bad mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we talked to them about their mental health. But the first thing they said to us is, what is mental health? They said, can you explain? And we explained, and then they said, why don't you ask us a question about what makes you happy, what makes me sad? So sometimes we need to think about the language we use. So what is mental health? You're probably all familiar with this because I know a lot of you are doing research around mental health and well-being yourself. So what I do when I talk about mental health, I tend to use the World Health Organization definition. Mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So mental health is positive. It's being able to function. Now, can you see the elephant on the right? The elephant, I don't know if you've come across this, the blind man and the elephant. Do you know the story? It is when we are dealing with a new concept or a new phenomenon, but we are blind and we don't always know what it means. We all have our own interpretation, which is why mental health has a different meaning to everybody. Because what does it mean to realize your abilities? If the World Health Organization says good mental health is realizing your abilities, what does that mean? What are abilities? What can you do? What can other people do? What is normal in stress? When I talk to young people, some young people get very, very stressed when there is an exam. They get so stressed that they might harm themselves and they can't cope. What does that mean? What is normal? What is productive and what is fruitful? And how do you contribute to your community? All of these questions are very important. So for many years now in the UK and in the global world, we talk about mental health. We talk about mental health awareness. And for example, the Mental Health Foundation says, and that's in the UK, good mental health is more than the absence of mental health problems. So what we need to look at now, we're in COVID, we're coming out of the pandemic, how many people are just about surviving and how many people are thriving? Now think about those two words. Surviving is, I am just about coping. For example, if somebody is surviving, it's somebody, I can give you an example. I was at my university a few days ago, and a student from Singapore who has just come over to the United Kingdom, she came over and she said, when she was a young person in Singapore, she suffered from anxiety and she had an eating disorder. She harmed herself. She did self-harm. And when she arrived in the UK, she still had those problems. And she was seeing a doctor and she was getting medication. But she came to the university to talk to me because I am the pastoral lead for my department. And I said, well done. Good for you for actually coming to the university when somebody is not doing well and they suffer from anxiety. Just getting out of bed and coming to the university is a big achievement. So she was surviving and we're trying to work out how we can help her. But what about thriving? Some people are doing very well. They're achieving a lot of things. Life is great for them. So we need to think about how many people are just about coping and how many people are doing really well. And is this linked to communities? And later on, when I finish my talk, I'm really interested in you telling me a little bit about, do you feel there are differences in communities and in groups of people when it comes to their mental health and well-being? And then, of course, the next step is, so what can we do? What can we do to help them? Now, in the world, we use the word resilience a lot. resilience is a word that suggests that you can cope despite adversity. So despite negativity, you're able to cope. But we have to be very careful how we use the word resilience, because resilience can also almost suggest that you have to be self-responsible, and that is a problem. Sometimes we expect very vulnerable people to be resilient, and they just can't, because they need extra help. So resilience is a concept that we need to really look into. In the UK and in other cultural contexts, sometimes people who are treated as badly behaved, children who grow in the care system, they're almost treated as if they're not resilient. But everybody has resilience in their own way. So we need to really think about how can we talk about resilience. Right, so hang on, just trying to, my slide is not going to the next one. I was worried that might happen. Let me just make this smaller. It's probably because of my internet. Let's see.
Or we can help you. We can share the PowerPoint, maybe.
Yes. Shall I stop sharing?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that would happen. That my slides will stop moving from one to another because of my internet.
You just say next if you want to see the slide. Okay. Maria or Tere will help you.
Okay, I'll wait for you to upload the slides. So whilst you're doing this, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm going to go through in my slides. So I've talked a little bit about mental health. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what is normal, what is abnormal, and what are the main models of mental health that are used. And then I would like to introduce the concept of mental health literacy and the research I've done in this area. So I'll wait a second for the PowerPoint to load. I hope it works. I can always go back to it myself. I've been in this position before where Zoom stops moving from one slide to another, but I can sort of manage. Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks so much. Could you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as I said, before I go into mental health literacy and the work I've done, I'd like to talk a little bit about, so when we talk about mental health, which is positive, what is not positive then? What does it mean to be different? There are many different ways of looking at what is mental health and what are mental health issues. And often we look at what is abnormal in two ways. And I've given you two examples here, and I think you're probably familiar with this. Abnormality as deviation from the average. This is really important because all of us, and that will be all of you, and it would be me as well, sometimes we just don't feel well. Sometimes in the morning you might feel a little bit anxious, or sometimes we just feel a little bit depressed. That is normal. It is not normal when you feel anxious or depressed for a long time. In as much as if we diagnose mental health issues, for example, using the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, like that is used all over the world, then, or the ICD, which is promoted by the World Health Organization, then we're looking at the pattern. So if for 6 months you feel anxious and you can't get out of bed, then we could say that that's abnormal. But there is a caveat, because have a look here. Nowadays in the world, a lot of people feel depressed. So if abnormal is what is statistically abnormal, in other words, if you look at numbers, you will see that more people are now depressed, especially during COVID, than at other times. So that means that it's actually normal to be depressed. So we have to be very careful how we conceptualize. Abnormality as deviation from the ideal. What does that mean? It means that we have ideal concepts and scenarios about what the world is like. So what is abnormal? Here we could also link it to cultural norms and values and so on. So abnormality and normality, we need to really think about what this means in relation to our culture, in relation to our own experiences, and in relation to what we see elsewhere. Can I have the next slide, please? So what is abnormal and what is normal in relation to how we view this in society? So socially acceptable and unacceptable in the society as a whole. So in society, we have norms and values. If there is a young person in my class who is always shouting and screaming and hurting somebody else, then you could say that that is abnormal. As I was telling you, the young person from Singapore who came to my university, who has had anxiety all her life and who's on medication, this is not socially unacceptable, but it is harmful for herself. Have a look at the third bullet point. It's harmful to herself. That means that that's abnormal because she's not doing well, she's not functioning. Abnormal is also what is distressing to other people. For example, if you are showing inappropriate behavior towards others and animals. So, and results from faulty and cognitions and thoughts. The last bullet point about faulty cognitions is very important. I always talk to my students about this when it comes to depression. Sometimes when you walk into a room and somebody doesn't acknowledge you and doesn't say, oh, hi, it's nice to see you, you could either think they don't like me, I'm not important, or you could think maybe they didn't see me. If your mind, your cognitions tell you it's because I'm not important, nobody likes me, then there is more of a tendency to develop depression and mental health issues. If on the other hand, you realize that maybe they didn't see me, tomorrow will be better. So it's also about how we make sense of the world. Can I have the next slide, please? But there is a problem, and that's why I showed you the elephant on my first slide. The elephant is the blind man and the elephant. If you are blind and you are presented with an object, you have to make sense of it. I do this with my students all the time. I show them an object and I ask them, what is it? But if you've never seen the object before, you have to guess. And even though you're not blind, you are blind in your understanding. For example, most of you will know what this is, right? It's a marker. It's, I write with it. But if you've never seen anything like this before, never, do you really know what this means? Do you have to play with it? In other words, if you haven't really come across the notion of mental well-being and mental illness, do you really understand what it means? And also, when is something normal and when is something abnormal? If we talk about deviation from the average, then if you are a hero, if you're doing really amazing things, you're saving somebody from falling off a building, then that is abnormal too, because a lot of people wouldn't do that. So it's also about what is normal and what is abnormal. So again, if you are very happy, then that would be abnormal too, because a lot of people in the world are not very happy. So we need to think about how do we define normality and abnormality. But I think what is the most important thing when it comes to mental health and well-being in children and young people is to talk about things. Because if we do not talk about things, there might be stigmas and people don't understand. They might think, why is my head so weird? What's going on with me? Because nobody has told them that sometimes it is okay to feel bad. And it's also okay to talk about it. So can I have the next slide, please? I wanted to quickly talk about this model. Now, you may have come across the model. I assume that you've seen that, there are different models of abnormality, and the biopsychosocial model is a model that was promoted by the medical world. Just to give you a little bit of background. When it comes to making sense of mental health and well-being, there are different models. There is the medical model that looks at abnormality and deficits, a little bit like physical health. When I break my leg, something is broken and it needs to be fixed. When somebody has anxiety or schizophrenia, there is something wrong with their health and it needs to be fixed. So the medical model would suggest give somebody medication and they might get better. The biopsychosocial model was developed by the medical model or the medical world to give more of a holistic explanation of mental health and well-being, namely suggesting that if somebody has a mental health problem, this can be caused by their biology, for example, predisposition, chemical imbalance, psychological, it could be trauma in their early life, and social, society and societal mechanisms. But there is a problem with this model as well, because the model still suggests that mental health issues can be defined. You can say somebody has depression. You can say somebody has schizophrenia. There are now models in society, such as the Power Threat Meaning Framework, the PTMF, Power Threat Meaning Framework, which suggests that actually, does depression exist? Does schizophrenia exist? Does psychosis exist? Or do we have to go away from using that language and just looking at how people make sense of the world? Can I have the next slide? And I'll talk to you a little bit about the model. So although the biopsychosocial model is a good model, it's also a bad model. The good thing about the biopsychosocial model of mental health issues and abnormality is that it forces you to look at different elements. So when somebody presents themselves to me and they say, I hear voices, I am self-harming, then I can look into those elements. I can look at what's going on. Has there been an injury? Is there a chemical imbalance? Maybe there's a predisposition. Maybe something runs in the family. It also allows me to then look at what is this person's background? Have they had trauma? Have they been abused? Have they had a difficult childhood? I can also look at their social and cultural context. For example, what happened with other people in their lives? Have they been bullied? What about their culture? What about their society? But what the biopsychosocial model does not allow me to do is to question whether mental health issues actually exist. Now, some of my research, and I won't go into detail about that, is framed within a critical realist framework. Critical realism says actually we need to move beyond diagnosing. We need to look at causal factors. We need to look at how people make sense. For example, somebody in Indonesia may have a different view of how they feel about a mental health issue than somebody in another context. So does that mean that we need to use a different label? So in other words, we need to be more holistic and open-minded. Can I have the next slide, please? Here we need to also think about who are we dealing with. So we're moving out of COVID, or maybe we are not. What do you think? I think maybe we're not quite at the end of the pandemic. There are still a lot of problems. But we are responding to it, and we know that certain communities are struggling, especially communities where people live in poverty. They're finding it very hard to deal with issues around isolation. So what have we found in the world, in the UK, but also in the world? Student well-being is going down. Now, I'd be really interested to hear about the situation in Indonesia, but I can tell you now that in the United Kingdom, student well-being is going down. People are not doing well. One reason is because of problems. Another reason is because there are not enough support systems. What about well-being of diverse groups? We know that there are various groups of students and their well-being is different. In the UK and in the United States, I have done a number of studies around students from the LGBTQ+ community. Those are students, so lesbian, gay, homosexual community, have more mental health issues than students from other communities. We also know that students from ethnic minority communities in the UK and in other countries in the world have more mental health issues because, one, being isolated, number two, sometimes because of racism, because of stigma, because sometimes for some communities it's harder to talk about mental health issues because of shame. International students, also students who travel from other countries to your country, can be quite isolated. And then finally, we also find that male students, as opposed to female, can have bad mental health issues, but they do not talk about it. So what we have to be careful with when we talk about students and young people, that we do not treat them as one group. They are not one group. They're not one homogeneous group. They are different people. They are male, female. They are different ethnicities, different communities, and so on. So we need to bear this in mind. My research, and I'm making some reference to this at the bottom, is very much about co-production. Now, what is co-production? Co-production is when you understand and make sense of lived experiences and knowledge by talking to people. So earlier on in my session, I told you that during the pandemic, I was asked to go into a secondary school in Portsmouth in the UK, which has children with social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties. We talked to them about mental health, but we also asked them, how can we learn about your mental health issues during COVID? And you know what they said? They said, apart from saying, please ask us questions about what makes you happy, what makes you sad, don't use mental health. They also asked us, do something with art, do something with drawing. So we bought paper tablecloths and all sorts of pencils, different colors, and we asked students to draw and write about their mental health. And it was really interesting. They made all sorts of drawings and we discussed it with them. So we listened to them. We asked them, what do you want to do? And they said, we don't want to talk about it. We want to draw. And they were drawing and it was really lovely. Can I have the next slide, please? This is something that I have researched quite a bit. And I have researched this in higher education in universities, but also looked at mental health literacy in the context of secondary schools. Mental health literacy is very important when it comes to help-seeking behavior. So as I said earlier on, we know that different groups of students and young people have mental health issues, but they don't always tell us. We do not always know. And sometimes a situation can escalate where somebody becomes suicidal or harms himself, and they don't tell anybody. Now, mental health literacy is very important here, and I will explain what it is. Mental health literacy in people consists of those three areas. Number one, recognition. Recognition means that the young person is able to understand what a mental health problem is. They can recognize a disorder. They know, if I feel this, I might be depressed. If I feel that, maybe there is some anxiety. So they have some recognition. They also know risk factors, because there are a number of risk factors associated with mental health issues. Loneliness and isolation, for example, is one of them. Early experiences. So recognition is one element of mental health literacy. Knowledge is linked to that, as I said. Knowledge is about causes, but it's also about treatment. If you know a little bit about, oh, I have a mental health problem, I don't feel very good, but if I talk to somebody or if I go for a run, that makes me feel better, that's really good. And then it's your attitude. The last point is really important. In certain communities in the world, there is a big stigma associated with mental health problems. They feel shame. They don't want to talk about it. And if you don't talk about it, you won't ask for help and you won't get better. So the key elements of mental health literacy are recognizing that there is an issue, knowledge of risk factors and what to do, and an attitude towards wanting help. So these, can I have the next slide? And I'll explain to you how important this is in young people. So at the moment, there is some information in the world on mental health literacy in schools, secondary and primary, but not so much about university students and their mental health literacy. Also, there isn't enough research on the link between mental health literacy, so knowledge of mental health issues, recognition and attitudes, and how this links to overall well-being. And that is where some of my research comes in. So Gogzinski at the bottom is one of the authors that I have worked with. So Paul Gogzinski and I have done a number of mental health literacy studies in the United Kingdom and in America. And it would be really interesting to do something like this in Indonesia as well, because it'd be really interesting to know if there is a link between students' understanding of mental health, their knowledge and their attitude, and help seeking. Can I have the next slide, please? So let's have a look at what we know about mental health literacy at the moment. We know that education and awareness can improve mental health literacy. So if we talk to young people about what is mental health, what are mental health issues, what can we do, then it improves their mental health literacy. However, we need to do more in order to improve their distress. So although talking to young people and educating them will help them in understanding mental health issues, we need to move to good interventions and personalized interventions in order to help them with their distress. The next one is lack of knowledge and stigma are barriers to help seeking. If a young person does not understand mental health issues, they don't know what it means, but also if they grow up in a community or in a society or in a family where there is a stigma, then they won't seek help. I can give you an example. I grew up in the Netherlands and I live in the United Kingdom. When I was a young person, I studied to mental health and well-being, but among a number of societies and communities in the Netherlands, there was still a stigma. And then they were saying things like, oh, you should never go to a psychologist, or you should never seek help from your mental health because that's bad, that's embarrassing. So people didn't do that. So it's really important that somebody understands that it's not bad and it's not embarrassing. So these things need to change. Under recognition. Some people don't always recognize when they're not doing well and they think it's something else. So that's a problem. We also know that lower levels of mental health literacy compared to previous research, there's association between mental health literacy and help-seeking behavior in undergraduates. So we know that there is less understanding of mental health and mental health issues in young people than we used to think. And we also know that there is, and that's positive, by the way, there is an association between mental health literacy and help seeking. This is positive. When a young person knows more about mental health problems and what it feels like, they are more likely to look for help, and that's good. So, a program of mental health literacy, which is now being introduced in universities across the world, is really good. It basically is educating young people about mental health and well-being. And what can it do? It can increase knowledge, it can reduce stigma, and it can increase help seeking. All of these things are important because reducing stigma means that you look for help. Looking for help is important because without it, there can be problems. Every university, and maybe your university as well, has a few examples of students who commit suicide. That is one of the worst things that can happen to your student community. We don't want that to happen. So mental health literacy and understanding of mental health issues can mean that they look for help and they get the help. Can I have the next slide, please? So mental health literacy is positively associated with help seeking and well-being, and negative with psychological stress. What that means is, so this is what our research shows. What it means is that if you have mental health understanding, you're more likely to get help. It doesn't necessarily mean that you feel better about yourself. If I understand what mental health issues mean, it doesn't mean that my own distress gets better. It just means that I understand it more. So mental health literacy does not predict well-being or distress. And suggesting programs to supplement mental health initiatives with exploring other factors which impact distress. Now think about this, and I'm saying postgraduate researchers, what we find in young people is that psychological distress and understanding that there are problems with your mental health and well-being is sometimes also associated with other factors. For example, students can be poor. They maybe don't have enough money. There might be issues around relationships with their family. There may be issues where they don't really like their course in the university, or they haven't been able to make friends. So over and above supporting young people in their mental health and well-being, we also need to look at other factors. So I can give you another example. I was talking to a young person last week, I think. She was a student who'd come over from Russia. and she was studying in London at my university, and she was really excited. But what she did say is, she said, I'm a little bit lonely. She said, I've come to the UK, I don't know anybody here, now I'm lonely. So we have a very specific, which I'm really excited about. We have a student advisor. She's a well-being person, and she knows London very well. She knows all the student societies and all everything. So I told my student to talk to this person who could then introduce her to the Russian society, so she could make friends with people from her own country. So these are things that are really important as well. So there is a need to engage with individual needs. There is a need to look at the individual, the key factors, the family situation, their socioeconomic situation, their ethnicity. In my former university, the University of Portsmouth, we found that there were quite a few issues around racism, where students from the Black community felt that they were not treated very well. And these issues needed to be addressed, because that can cause depression if you feel that there is racism in your university, because it means that they don't have a sense of belonging. I don't know if you've come across the word belonging, but it's very important that you feel you belong. So in your university, for young people to feel like they're part of the society, of the community, of what you're offering, is so important for their own identity. And if that doesn't happen, then there is quite a problem. So these are things that we need to address as well. On top of that, psychological counselling can then move beyond other issues, such as family issues. I used to have a friend years ago who did very well at university, and then she broke up. She was going to get married, and then the wedding didn't go ahead, and she had a breakdown. So counsellors looked at other factors. They didn't look at her university life. They looked at her family and her situation. So important to take an individual approach. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, what have we done in the UK, and what can we do in the world when it comes to supporting young people? Last year, when that's probably, I think it was November, I was asked to give a talk at a university in India, Amity University, and there was a big conference about supporting young people and mental health and well-being. And they wanted to know, what do we do in the UK and what can we do in other parts of the world? And it was really lovely to hear that in India, there's so many exciting things happening for students during the COVID pandemic. And it's the same in the UK, and I'm assuming it's the same in Indonesia, where we offer different ways of supporting. So campus-based. What I wanted to draw your attention to, and again, you will know this because you're, all familiar with psychology and mental health and well-being, is that there are different systems, but we have to be very careful how we use those systems. So, for example, there is the personal tutor system. In my university, I am the pastoral lead. In other words, I am overseeing the personal tutoring in my department. This is very important because a personal tutor is not a counsellor. And sometimes it's important for a personal tutor to be aware of that, because students may expect mental health support and counselling, and the personal tutor has to say, my role is to support you in your individual study. My role is to listen to you when you are worried, but I cannot provide counselling because a personal tutor is not qualified. So what we do is we have a very clear system in place. We have a chart for students and tell them what to do. So if you are worried about your course, we say, or about your modules, please talk to your personal tutor. If you are worried about your mental health and well-being, please go to the Student Wellbeing Centre. If things are escalating for you, please contact the National Health Service. So we have different ways of engaging with students so they know where to go. That's also why we have a number of online support services. There are currently in the UK and other parts of the world some really exciting apps available where students can go on an app online and they can type in what's wrong with them, what they think is happening, and they can ask for help that way. The other thing is that's really important in supporting people in their well-being is other students, other young people, because the best support that you can get is through peer support. It's through people like you. So we use a system of student ambassadors and student activists and the student voice. All of these groups, so student ambassadors, student activists, and student voice, consist of students from different communities. And they are there to support other students, and you can talk to them and you can ask for advice. The student ambassadors, for example, deal with issues around equality, inclusion, but also some mental health and well-being. In the UK, there is a big focus on what we call EDI, equality, diversion, and inclusion, because we find that certain students don't do very well in their studies and in their well-being. And those are often students who are poor, from poorer backgrounds, students from families where the parents have not had a very good education and they are the first ones to go to university, students from a range of ethnic minority communities, and so on. So we support those students. Can I have the next slide, please? So when we did our study on mental health literacy, it was a quantitative study. The quantitative study that we did consisted of a number of questionnaires that we handed out to students. Strengths and difficulties questionnaire, I think it was. There were about 5, I think, that we used. And we found a lot of information about the link between mental health literacy and help-seeking behavior. We found that the more you know about mental health problems, the more likely it is that you are seeking help and the stigma goes away. That's good. But we also found that if you know more about mental health issues, sometimes you may perhaps be more distressed because, well, we didn't actually find a clear link between distress, but it didn't improve, or it didn't sort of have a direct link with reducing psychological distress. But what we also realized is that when we asked people to fill in those questionnaires, we missed out certain voices. And that's why I am saying that we need to do more. And the next step, I think, what we need to do is qualitative research. So we've done big questionnaires, and we can provide the information to you if you're wanting to do a similar study in Indonesia. But we also felt that we needed to interview students, because the group of students that we felt their voices were especially not clear from the questionnaires were the students from ethnic minority communities. In the UK, this is called the BAME community. BAME are the Black Asian minority communities. The word BAME is not a very nice word because it almost suggests that you have Caucasian on the one hand and BAME on the other, Black Asian minority, which is not appropriate. So the UK needs to rethink the language they are using around ethnic minority groups. But we found that a lot of students from ethnic minority communities do not fill in the questionnaires. They don't really talk about their mental health problems. So we needed to find ways of talking to them. We needed to find ways of getting them involved because we want to help everybody. The other thing we need to do is longitudinal work. So we have found that there is a link between good mental health literacy and help-seeking behavior, but it would be good to know, how does that happen over the many years that you are studying? Does it help you throughout your study and throughout your student cycle? So it is really important to be aware of that. Can I have the next slide? I think that might be the last one. Oh, not quite. So what we were saying then in our research is that researchers need to collaborate. They need to talk about diversity more, and we need to make sure that we involve the voices of all the students, not just this, because when you do a questionnaire and quantitative research, you are dependent on the people who come forward and who fill in the questionnaire. But if this is only one group of students, then you do not capture the voice of the others. So we're talking about diversity. As I told you earlier on, the UK puts a lot of emphasis on EDI, equality, diversion, and inclusion. In every way, not just in relation to race, but also disability. Students with disabilities, we need to listen to them as well. Students from poor backgrounds, and so on. So people need to be aware of the notion of intersectionality. I don't know if you've heard of that word. Intersectionality suggests that in life, a lot of things come together. For example, what you often see is that students from ethnic minority communities are more poorer they are living in poverty more than other students. So it is their ethnicity, their poverty. We also see that there is a link with disability. We also see that there is a link with gender. Girls are more likely to come forward and talk about mental health issues than boys, for example. So these are things, and sexuality as well. So intersectionality suggests that we need to look at the whole package. We need to look at everything that you are, because you could, for example, be a student who comes from a minority community, who has a disability and who lives in poverty and who is maybe a boy. Then you are less likely to ask for help or get help. So we need to be aware of all of this. Can I have the next slide? Here's just some of the references of the work that I've done. So that's the end of my talk. And it was lovely talking to you. And let me know if you have any questions. But I'd also like to hear about what you're doing on this front in Indonesia. But yeah, thank you. That's my talk.
Thank you, Dr. Wendy. It's interesting session with you. I would like to welcoming also our dean here come with us. Maybe Ibu Effie want to say hey to Wendy. Okay. Ibu Effie.
Yes. Hi, Wendy. Thank you
Hello.
for coming to us. Thank you for sharing. And of course, me especially would like you to come again to our faculty. Maybe next time we can have any exchange, like lecture exchange or student exchange later. So we come to join some activities. Hopefully, if we can have more intense discussion about diversity, like that you have done with Bu Ellie and the teams from the research about forgiveness before, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would be really looking forward to coming to Indonesia again. And it would be really great if you guys could come over and visit me in London.
It would be nice.
It's a lovely place where my university, UCL, is one of the top universities in the UK and in the world, I think. But anyhow, it's a really, really beautiful place. And I'm really enjoying working there. And London is a lovely city.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the time.
Surabaya is nicer, I must say. I really loved visiting. The weather is just so beautiful because I don't like cold weather. I do not like it cold. So it was really nice to visit you last time. And your university is beautiful, really beautiful and really nice. So, yeah.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Effie.
You're welcome.
We are looking forward for the collaboration soon. Okay. For the student also, if you would like to give a question, so please raise your hand and we'll open the mic. And welcome also Ibu Ella Triviati, one of our lecture here. Okay, Galuh, want to ask question or maybe Maria can help?
Yes, I want to ask a question.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ellie. Hi, Dr. Wendy.
Hello.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question. To describe the case, so I have this friend. He's also from Indonesia, and currently he's studying in China, and he's studying business there. To sum it all off, he's on his last 2 semesters, and then all his friends are basically they're going home since they're graduating. So right now he's pretty lonely, and one of his ways to cope with this stress, I would say, is to play games. And he does this by playing games with me online, and then he's always pursuing and finding trying to find me to play games every day with him. So the question is, how do I help him as a support system, but not sacrifice my own mental health? Because sometimes there are days that you cannot tend to the needs of someone, right? So I would like to ask my question. Thank you.
Thank you. So you're talking about somebody, is that somebody you're supporting and who's not doing very well and who is asking for quite a lot of support from you?
Yes, Dr. Wendy. So basically he's lonely and I'm trying to help, but I can't do that every day because, yeah, I have my own priorities as well.
Yeah, and I really agree. And it's really easy to be in that position where somebody puts quite a lot of demands on your time, especially when you're a very friendly person like you and when you're kind and when you're there to help. Then sometimes it is a problem when somebody oversteps the boundaries. So in that case, I would refer them to other people and I would say, I can only be available certain days, because, or you could say I'm busy, but I would certainly pass them over to the support. I don't know if there's support in the university that you can refer them to, or other support that they can get elsewhere, other online services, tutors, and so on. I mean, it depends on what systems there are available, but I would definitely pass them on to somebody else in the nicest possible way. That's what I did with some of our students. I have a colleague who's a very, very lovely person. And what happens is that a lot of students come to her and they want to talk to her all the time. And those students have other support mechanisms as well. So I've told her to tell them to take it to other support people as well, so they can help her. And you could almost say other people might be in a better place to help you. So it doesn't look like you're rejecting this person, but it looks like you're saying, oh, this is really serious. I would recommend that you talk to this person, that person, or a tutor or somebody else, because they might be in a better position to help.
Okay.
Thank you for answering, Dr. Wendy.
Okay, thank you. Is there any question from the student? Maybe kelompok 9. Okay.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask, sorry, let me just have a quick look.
Yeah, the risk of in improving mental health literacy, such as self-diagnosis, or you're talking about self-diagnosis, how to keep this from happening. So I mean that what happens if we do the self-diagnosis? The risk, I mean. Okay.
I think that's a very good question, and I can see where you're coming from. So I think the issue, I think the key focus of mental health literacy is to improve awareness, but to avoid self-diagnosing. But of course, you're right. If you provide somebody with more information about what mental health issues are, there is more of a chance that they are self-diagnosing. In and of itself, that's not a complete problem, because it shows that they are thinking about the issues. Sometimes when somebody suffers from extreme anxiety, self-harm and depression, and they don't understand it, they don't know what's wrong with their head, and that things are escalating. So when they understand that this is a mental health problem and this is something they can talk about, then that could relieve the stress. So it could the good thing about mental health literacy is that it takes away the stigma. It helps people to understand that it's normal sometimes to have a mental health problem. It also helps people to understand that you need to go and seek for help. We have found a direct link between mental health literacy and finding help and talking to families and friends. So the positive side of mental health literacy, namely understanding that you have a problem and understanding that you need to find help and talk to people, outweighs the risk. I think in our current society, and you're right, there is always a little bit of a danger that people are starting to self-diagnose. Because we have the internet. Even if you don't have mental health literacy, we would go on our phone and like, oh, I'm not feeling well. What is this? What is that? So I think there is a danger, and that's absolutely something we need to warn people against. The flip side is, the key thing is that they go and seek help And even if they have self-diagnosed, that's not a complete problem, because sometimes when you self-diagnose, you may also be able to then find support services. So let's say, for example, if I think that I have depression, I might look to see, well, where can I go? What can I do to get help? But yeah, the key thing about mental health literacy is understanding issues around mental health problems. A little bit like if there are issues around your physical health, for example. We tell people, if you cough all the time and the cough doesn't go away, please go and see a doctor, because it could be cancer, lung cancer. It may not be, and it probably is not lung cancer, but if you cough all the time. So it's about awareness as well. It's about getting people to go and talk and find help. So I think, although there might be a slight issue with people over-diagnosing themselves, mental health literacy is very important when it comes to getting rid of stigma and seeking help and getting support. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. I think we have students that raised hand already. Virginia Hadi, maybe you can have an open camera. Okay.
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to ask question. First of all, I want to say that it is an honor to hear from your research and everything. But I want to ask in Indonesian, we are very, very collective in a way. That means for us, family is a very, very important aspect for us. But even though we are psychology student, and we already have some mental health literacy, and of course we would share our literacy to our friends, to our families. But sometimes our families kind of link our mental health issues with religious aspect of our life, like, oh, that means you're not grateful enough, or maybe you're not religious enough, that's why you have depression, or that's why you have anxiety. So how can we what can we do to at least have this mental health literacy to our family? Because I think most of us as students and as a teenagers, we have probably a mediocre level of mental health literacy, but our family is a different thing. So how can we spread this literacy to our family in a way that they will be open-minded to it?
That's a really good question. And there's a few things to answer here. So when we did our mental health literacy study, we found that young people, indeed, who have a good relationship with their family and they talk to their family, they're doing much better. Now, talking to your family about problems isn't always sort of a linear thing. So it isn't always saying things like, oh, I'm depressed, help me. It's more about, oh, I'm a bit worried about something, or things aren't working out. So what we found is that the young people who talk to their parents or family or friends, regardless of what they talk about, were doing better. Sometimes they wouldn't say things, I'm depressed. They would just say, oh, I'm going to university, or I'm going to school, and people aren't very nice to me, or I feel a bit lonely, and they listen. So it's also about listening. Now, when it comes to making families more, aware of mental health literacy, or becoming more mental health, literacy, or more familiar with that concept themselves, that's a process. It depends on, in Western society, it is quite similar, where for families, it is very hard to realize that somebody might have more than just a little bit of a worry. It's one thing you talking to your family saying, I'm worried a bit. It's another thing, of course, when families realize that there is something a little bit more serious, because immediately they will start feeling guilty, maybe to an extent, because a lot of work that's being done about mental health issues suggests that if you have a mental health problem, it may well be linked to your early experiences. So immediately families are going to think, well, I haven't done anything wrong, it must be you. So I think it's about having these open discussions without blame, because sometimes it is the feeling of blame, and it is also dealing with stigmas. And stigmas are there. They are there everywhere in families where they feel like, oh, my child doesn't have a mental health issue. I mean, when I started working in mental health as a mental health professional, my own mother said, oh, people with mental health issues are weird. And I was like, how can you say that? You know, how can you say? So it is a lack of understanding. So I talked to her and I explained, well, some people have genuine problems. Some people are just not doing very well. And that's not a sign of weakness. It's just a sign of how life treats them. It is a sign of a combination of factors. So they need help. And it is not anything that, you know, sometimes it's nobody's fault. Sometimes maybe there are some early trauma, but it is about moving forward. And I think that's another thing about mental health literacy. It's not so much about looking, where does it come from? Why do you feel like that? Have you been religious enough? Have you been good enough? It's more about, let's move forward. This is what's wrong with this person. Now, what can we do next to make it better, rather than looking at what might have caused it? And I think sometimes cognitive behavioral therapy is quite good, because it actually tells you to sort of think about, well, what is your thinking? How can we change it, and how can we change your behavior? Whereas psychoanalysis very much looks at your childhood, and it suggests that something might have happened to your child. So that looks at the causes. So I think we need to move forward and looking at what can we do to help, rather than where does it come from? And that's where those conversations with families can come into as well, I think. But it is a process, and something that isn't always easy, which is why in some communities, people will not look for help because of the stigma, because they feel a little bit ashamed. So we need to deal with this. Very important.
Dr.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah. There are two questions. I think this is about how we maintain the mental health or well-being during the pandemic season. And this is from the student also, that talking about how hectic they are during the online course. Maybe you have any experience in UK also, Wendy?
Okay, so I'll have a look. So I would like to ask about how to maintain the mental health well-being while we have a hectic schedule on our course. That's a really good question. And I think it's about taking breaks. I keep going back to my students, but I have another student who is in Hong Kong, and she is wanting to talk to me a lot because she feels just like what you're saying here, that she has a hectic schedule. She asked me to talk to her the other day, and she said, I have to read 2 books every week. It's too much. I can't do it. So I said, you have to space it out. You have to think about, how can you do what you can do? How can you read you need to do what you can do. And if you can't handle reading all that material, you need to find a way of reading important parts. So I think, first of all, it's taking time out and taking breaks for yourself, and starting your day, trying not to be too hectic. I know we all have a very hectic schedule, but we need to schedule in little times to ourselves, little things where you can enjoy yourself, where you can take a break. And also sort of thinking about, how much do I really need to do? In other words, which work is really a priority and which work can I leave until tomorrow? So it's not getting yourself, and sometimes when you put it together in a schedule, you will realize that actually maybe it's manageable. I always make a little schedule every day. I'm saying, this is what I want to do today, and that's fine. And I'm not going to do any more. So it is about taking those breaks, maybe do meditation, but giving yourself time to adjust to life as well. The next question is, previously discussed about the pandemic, I'd like to ask, is it every phenomenon or just a few events that can change a person's mental health or well-being? That's a good question. And that's a difficult one to answer, because we have seen an increase in mental health issues during the pandemic. And that is also to do with students who already had some mental health issues, and they were able to get support prior to the pandemic by coming into the university and see support services. During the pandemic, everything is online. And for some people, this is incredibly hard. I was talking to a young person who has autism. Do you know autism? Has autism, anxiety, and depression. And she told me that this escalated during the pandemic because she can't do Zoom. She finds it really scary. So we told her that it's okay to take a break. And don't do the Zoom and try and catch up after, because she found it just too confrontational. So maintaining your mental health and well-being during the pandemic is hard, but it's also recognizing that it's hard for everybody. And I think the key thing, again, is to talk to people. Don't suffer on your own. If you feel low about things, if you feel that you're just not able to cope, you will find that there are other people who feel the same. So one thing could be setting up a peer support group, and the university can help with that. We have a number of peer support groups, student advisors, talk to your tutor, and make sure to take enough breaks and look after yourself and acknowledge that it's hard. Don't think that you're bad if you find things hard. So I think it's just important to recognize that it's okay sometimes to not feel okay. I hope that helps. Are there any other questions?
Okay. I think the time is running. Masih ada lagi yang ingin bertanya? Semuanya? Raise hand. Okay. We still have time, really? It's almost time. Yeah. There's a question that rise through the email already. That's about the how we find the risk factor and protective factor surround us. And I mean, every of us will have our own risk factor and protective factor, and how we find out our risk and protective factor. Okay.
Yeah, and I think to an extent, there are a number of models and processes we can look at and concepts when it comes to risk factors. I do think the biopsychosocial model is quite helpful in as much as that we do know that there are certain biological risk factors. We do know if mental health issues run in the family, you're more likely to have a mental health issue yourself. We also know that life experiences can be a risk factor. It is a psychological element. For example, your early experiences. But I find a lot at my university, especially in Portsmouth, and I don't know if you find the same, but students who have experienced bullying in their life, early on in life, often come to university with mental health problems, and that is a real issue. So that's a risk factor as well. And then there's the stigmas and labels. In the UK, we have in America, which I don't really like, but they use the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Have you come across the ACEs framework? ACEs are a number of risk factors, and if there are 10, I think, and if you have more than 5 of them, I think you're at danger of developing severe mental health issues. And those are issues to do with early experiences, support, parental support, and so on. The ACEs system, or the Adverse Childhood Experiences scale, has been criticized because it is a little bit doom and gloom. It's a little bit suggests that, oh, we can measure people in relation to factors and then we can see whether they're at risk, whereas some people would say that they have a lot of risk factors and they're fine. So it's also really important to look at individual cases, because we know that some people have had quite a tough life, and for some reason they're doing really well. And I think that's where resilience comes in as much as sometimes young people have support systems around them. I mean, it only takes somebody coming to Surabaya University and they meet a really lovely tutor, and that tutor or that teacher or that person is really nice to them. And that can be a big help, and that can sort of help them do really well. So individual cases are important as well. So yeah, I hope that helps. I can see there's another question here. In Indonesia, still a lot of stigma about mental health issues. And I think we find stigmas in all communities. And the only way to deal with stigmas is to talk about things, is to talk about it being okay to seek help. And I will give you a quick example because I realize we're running out of time. I work with a race equality council in the UK. And we were talking about how families who've got families with mental health issues are in ethnic minority communities are less likely to seek help because they prefer to seek help from their own family. So we talked about trust in services and how services can be more inclusive and listen to their voices and their needs. So I think it's talking about things and opening up discussions and showing, again, that it is okay sometimes not to be okay, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. So it's the conversations we have. I hope that helps.
Masih mute, Bu.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Wendy. This we have such interesting session this afternoon, and hopefully we can have you again in another time. We learn much from you how important about the mental health literacy, and also I think I know about the the marginal people that we have to put on also to be attentive of that. Sometimes we exclude that kind of marginal people because we be burdened also with our mental health problem for now. But I think from now on we have to find out about that thing also. Thank you very much again for your coming, and I think and I hope that we can have you for another session.
Thank you. And I will invite you to do a session for my university as well. For my, hope that's okay with you, and that would be in February maybe.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to have a session with your student also, and maybe some of our teacher also, if we can have like a collaboration. We should maybe in the long run, we will get the data from my side in Surabaya, especially in Indonesia, how they survive during the pandemic season, and maybe you can have your data from your side, so we can exchange learn from that.
That would be lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ibu Tini, you want to say a word for closing?
No. Well, I really enjoy your talking, because it's really inspiring, and I actually have some questions, but later on maybe for the next meeting, because when you talk about critical realists, I always think about the qualitative research, which you mentioned about quantitative. So it's really interesting. Also about intersectionality, which we use it in our class for gender and feminism in our faculty. So
oh wow, that sounds exciting. I would love to talk more. Yeah.
yeah. So someday maybe.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you very much again. And thank you all also for the students for the coming and the participation during the session, the assistant also, and our beloved dean that coming to the session, and especially for your coming, really. And hopefully we can see again soon. Okay, have a good evening, almost evening. Good afternoon for all.
Thank you very much. Very nice to see you all. And please contact me. Ellie's got my email address, so please get in touch.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Wendy. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Wendy.
Thank you, Dr. Wendy.
Thank you, Dr. Wendy.
Thank you, Dr. Wendy.
Okay, Dr. Wendy, you can leave the session.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Oke, terima kasih ya semuanya untuk kerja kerasnya asisten dan juga mahasiswa. Terima kasih Bu Evi juga untuk kesempatannya. Moga-moga kita bisa lakukan lebih sering lagi di saat yang lain. Iya enggak, Halum? Oke, makasih semuanya.
Hebat tuh
Terima
teman-teman.
kasih.
Iya, Mbak Tini juga.
Teman-teman hebat.
Ya,
Top. Turun. Itu
Ya.
boleh dapat ininya nggak ya? PowerPoint-nya ya, wis selalu deh ngejarnya PowerPoint. Kuliahan nih selalu carinya PowerPoint.
Ya, Maria ada kok. Ya, Maria.
Saya kirimkan langsung di chat.
Apa?
Saya kirimkan langsung di chat Zoom, Kak Bu.
Oh iya, bisa begitu ya.
Oke. Oh, di chat ya.
Belum foto ya Bu tadi ya,
Ya,
sama
lupa.
Wendy.
Tapi
Lupa.
ada rekamannya kok.
Itu rekaman tadi.
Nggak ada di IKEA kemarin, nggak ada di Ranto. Foto bersama ya, Maria. Lupa ya,
Iya.
Maria.
Aku tadi pikir ada foto.
Iya.
Anak nang Randon, tapi anak rekamannya.
Iya.
Lupa gua.
Lupse.
Ya dia ikut pinter tapi anu ya, to the point.